One scene. 30 seconds of dialogue. No one expected it to explode across the nation and threaten to destroy one of the greatest comedy shows ever made. When it aired on British television, the BBC's switchboard lit up like a fire alarm. Angry viewers flooded the network. Parents complained. Critics demanded answers. The cast didn't know what hit them. But here's the shocking part. The scene was meant to mock racism, not celebrate it. So why did it nearly end a legend? To understand why one scene nearly destroyed Fawlty Towers, you have to understand what made it untouchable in the first place. The show premiered on BBC television in 1975. It was only 6 episodes. 6. But those 6 episodes changed British comedy forever. The premise was beautifully simple. A neurotic hotel owner named Basil Fawlty, played by John Cleese, constantly clashed with his guests, his staff, and his domineering wife. Every episode was like watching a man slowly lose control in real time. What made Fawlty Towers different from every other sitcom was that it felt real. Basil wasn't a cartoon character spouting jokes. He was a desperate man trapped in situations that spiraled into chaos. When he lied to guests, you felt his panic. When he tried to cover up his mistakes, you cringed because you understood why. The humor came from truth, not punchlines. The show won award after award. It became one of the most celebrated British television programs ever created. Across the Atlantic, American networks were desperate to remake it. The cast was invited to festivals and celebrations. John Cleese became a household name. Schools discussed the episodes. Families gathered around their televisions week after week. By 1979, when the show returned for its second season, Fawlty Towers wasn't just entertainment. It was cultural proof that British television could produce something as good as anything in the world. It was safe. It was beloved. It seemed impossible that anything could touch it. Then came episode 4 of season 2. And everything changed. The setup was straightforward. A group of German guests arrived at the hotel. Basil, the owner, was desperate to make a good impression. He wanted to prove he wasn't the kind of Brit who held grudges or made tired jokes about World War II. He really, genuinely wanted to be respectful. Then everything fell apart. In his desperate attempt to avoid mentioning anything offensive, Basil started saying the exact opposite of what he intended. He made references to Nazis. He made racial comments about Germans. He kept digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole of his own making. The comedy came from the irony. A man so worried about offending people that he ended up being deeply offensive. It was satire. Dark satire, but satire nonetheless. John Cleese wasn't making fun of German people. He was making fun of British people. He was mocking the tendency of Brits to hold on to old stereotypes and World War II jokes, even when they tried not to. The scene was designed to show how ridiculous and outdated these attitudes were. It was meant to expose prejudice, not celebrate it. But here's where it gets complicated. Context doesn't always matter to a viewing audience watching at home. When people turned on their televisions and saw a British man making Nazi references and offensive generalizations, many didn't stop to think about the satirical intent. They just heard the words. And they were furious. The BBC received complaints immediately. Not a few. Not dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Angry letters poured in. People felt betrayed. How could the BBC air something like this? How could they let someone say these things on national television? Didn't they care about standards? Didn't they understand what they were broadcasting? The controversy spread beyond the switchboard. Newspapers picked it up. Television critics debated it. Parent groups organized. Sponsors started getting nervous. What had been an untouchable, beloved show suddenly felt dangerous. The network that had celebrated Fawlty Towers was now under fire for airing it. And the cast had no idea what was coming. The reaction was immediate and intense. In the 1970s, before the internet, before social media, complaints still traveled fast. Word of mouth was powerful. Angry viewers called the BBC. They wrote letters that arrived by the thousands. Television critics who had praised the show weeks earlier now questioned whether it had gone too far. What made it worse was the timing. Britain in 1979 was dealing with real racial tensions. Immigration was a heated political topic. Unemployment was rising. Economic anxiety was creating divisions in society. For many people, seeing these stereotypes on their television, even in a supposedly satirical context, felt like the show was pouring fuel on an already burning fire. Some viewers didn't believe it was satire at all. To them, Fawlty was just saying what people actually thought. They saw the scene as validation of their own prejudices, not a mockery of them. The show's intent became almost irrelevant. The damage was done the moment those words left John Cleese's mouth. The BBC found itself in an impossible position. The network had built its reputation on Fawlty Towers. The show was a point of pride. But now it was becoming toxic. Sponsors who had eagerly attached their names to the series were getting uncomfortable. Advertisers worried about association. Some threatened to pull their support. Behind the scenes, the cast and crew were blindsided. They had created something they believed in. They thought the Germans episode was clever. They thought audiences would understand the satire. Instead, they watched their beloved show transform into something controversial and dangerous overnight. The joy and pride they felt about their work evaporated. John Cleese started receiving hate mail. Not just criticism. Actual hate mail. People accused him of racism. They said he had revealed his true self. Some viewers said they would never watch again. The man who had created one of the greatest comedies of all time was now being condemned as a bigot. The pressure on the BBC mounted daily. Phone lines stayed jammed. Complaints kept coming. And then came a question nobody could answer. Would the network stand by the show, or would they capitulate to the outrage? The BBC's internal crisis was unlike anything the network had experienced before. This wasn't a ratings problem. Fawlty Towers had massive viewership. This was a values problem. The corporation had spent decades building a reputation for quality and responsibility. Now they were being attacked for broadcasting something many viewers found deeply offensive. Sponsors were the first to apply real pressure. Companies didn't want their names attached to controversy. In the 1970s, a brand's reputation was everything, and associating with racism, even satirical racism, was commercial suicide. Some advertisers quietly pulled back. Others sent formal letters demanding the BBC address the situation. A few threatened to withdraw entirely if the network didn't make a public statement. Inside the BBC, there was genuine debate about what to do. Some executives wanted to ban the episode. Others argued that would be censorship. Some suggested issuing an apology. But to whom? For what, exactly? The show was trying to mock racism, not promote it. Did apologizing mean admitting the show was actually racist? The logic became circular and painful. The controversy wasn't contained to Britain anymore. It was spreading internationally. American television networks that had licenses to air the show started getting complaints too. Other countries reported similar outrage. What had been a British scandal was becoming a global one. Fawlty Towers was being discussed in newspapers across Europe and North America, and most of the coverage was negative. John Cleese was increasingly isolated. He believed in the episode. He believed in the satire. But watching people condemn him, watching sponsors abandon the show, watching the network squirm, it was taking a toll. The creative joy of making comedy was being suffocated by controversy. Every interview he did, every statement he made, seemed to make things worse instead of better. The real threat came in whispers at first. Then in direct terms. If the BBC didn't address this, if they didn't take action, there were calls to remove the Germans episode from reruns. Some critics demanded the entire second season be shelved. The suggestion that one of the greatest comedy series ever made should be buried seemed insane. But the pressure was real. The anger was real. and the network was running out of time to respond. John Cleese knew something had to give. But he wasn't prepared for what he was about to do. John Cleese understood something that the angry viewers and worried sponsors didn't. Satire doesn't work by whispering. It works by being loud. It works by making people uncomfortable. The whole point of the Germans episode was to show how ridiculous British stereotypes about Germany were. But satire has a contract with its audience. You have to trust the creator. You have to believe they're not secretly agreeing with the offensive material they're presenting. That trust was shattered. So Cleese decided to rebuild it by being completely honest. In interviews, he began explaining the scene methodically. He pointed out that Basil's attempt to be polite is what makes him offensive. That's the joke. He's so worried about being seen as a typical, stereotypical Brit that he becomes exactly that. The scene wasn't celebrating these attitudes. It was holding them up to ridicule. It was saying, look how stupid this is. Look how ridiculous British people sound when they do this. Cleese went further. He talked about the intent behind the writing. He explained that comedy's job was sometimes to say uncomfortable things to expose uncomfortable truths. If comedy never made people uncomfortable, if it never challenged anything, it became meaningless entertainment. Real satire, he argued, had to have teeth. It had to make you squirm. That was the whole point. What made his defense powerful was that he didn't sound defensive. He sounded convinced. He didn't apologize for making the episode. He didn't apologize for believing in it. He simply explained what he had been trying to do and asked audiences to trust his intent. The response was split. Some people understood. Critics who had initially condemned the episode started reconsidering. They began writing pieces about the importance of allowing comedy to be provocative. They argued that banning the Germans would be a form of censorship that hurt art, not helped it. But others remained unconvinced. They still heard the words. They still felt offended. To them, Cleese's explanations sounded like justifications. They believed he was hiding behind satire as an excuse to say racist things without consequences. The BBC was caught between two camps. Cleese's defense had given the network ammunition to stand by the show. But the controversy wasn't dying. If anything, the debate was intensifying. The network had to make a decision. Would they let this blow over naturally, or would they take dramatic action? That decision would determine everything. When the BBC finally spoke publicly, they defended John Cleese and the show. They acknowledged the complaints. They took the criticism seriously. But they also explained that they believed in the artistic intent behind the episode. They argued that satire deserved protection. Banning the episode would set a dangerous precedent. The network stood firm. It was a bold move. And in many ways it worked. The debate gradually shifted. More people began understanding the satirical intent. Critics wrote lengthy pieces analyzing why The Germans was actually brilliant satire, not racism. Universities and schools started discussing it as a case study in comedy and commentary. What had seemed like a career-ending scandal started to feel like a learning moment for society. But the damage was done in ways nobody could measure. The show's magical quality, that feeling of untouchability, was gone. Sponsors who had hesitated eventually returned, but with less enthusiasm. Ratings remained strong, but there was an underlying tension now. People watched differently. They analyzed differently. The joy had curdled into something more complex. Then came the announcement that nobody expected. The second season of Fawlty Towers would be the last. John Cleese decided to end the show on his own terms. He didn't want to drag it out. He didn't want to watch it decline. He wanted to finish while it was still brilliant, while people still cared deeply about it, even if some of them were angry. The question that followed was immediate and impossible to answer. Did the controversy kill the show? Cleese maintained that it didn't. He said he had always planned to end after 2 seasons. He said the show had said everything it needed to say. 12 episodes total. That was enough. He wasn't running from anything. He was protecting the show's legacy. But behind the scenes, reports suggested otherwise. Producers talked about exhaustion. The joy had been drained from the production. The controversy had cast a shadow over everything. Some crew members felt like they had to defend their work constantly. Some actors wanted out. The environment that had created something beautiful was poisoned by anger and misunderstanding. What made it worse was that the Germans episode remained brilliant. Even critics who had condemned it initially had to admit, this was masterful satire. This was exactly what comedy should do. But somehow, that didn't matter. The moment had passed. The show was ending. And the question that would haunt Fawlty Towers for decades was just beginning to form. Had we all been wrong about what the episode was actually saying? Time has a way of clarifying intention. When you watch the Germans now, divorced from the panic and anger of 1979, something becomes obvious. Basil Fawlty is the villain of the scene. Not the Germans. Not John Cleese. Basil is a ridiculous, bumbling, prejudiced man who proves over and over again why his stereotypes are absurd. The Germans he meets are polite, reasonable, and patient. They're barely the focus. The real target is Basil's stupidity. That was always the point. John Cleese wasn't making fun of Germans. He was making fun of Brits, specifically, Brits who held on to tired old prejudices. He was showing that these attitudes had survived World War II and the 1970s through sheer cultural stubbornness, not through any logical reasoning. It was brilliant. And 1979 Britain wasn't ready to hear it. What happened after Fawlty Towers ended became the real story. The show was rebroadcast endlessly. It was studied in schools. It won more awards. It became one of the most influential television comedies ever created. International audiences discovered it. Young people who hadn't watched it in 1979 experienced it for the first time without the controversy, and they understood immediately what Cleese had been trying to do. The controversy actually proved the show's point. British audiences had been so triggered by hearing their own stereotypes played back to them that they couldn't see the satire. That's exactly what the episode was about. People being blind to their own prejudices. In a strange way, the angry reaction validated everything Cleese was saying. John Cleese himself never apologized. Not then, not now. He maintained that the episode was satire, and he was right. But he also said something important in later interviews. He understood why people were upset. He wasn't dismissive of their anger. He just believed that comedy sometimes had to take risks. Sometimes it had to make people uncomfortable to say something true. Fawlty Towers survived. It became immortal. The Germans episode went from being nearly career-ending to being celebrated as one of the greatest pieces of satirical comedy television ever produced. The show ended after 12 episodes, but its impact never stopped growing. The real lesson wasn't about the episode. It was about what happened when society couldn't distinguish between satire and endorsement. It was about what we lose when we react with anger before we understand. And it was about the power of art to offend and educate at the same time. So here's the question for you. Knowing what we know now, what would you have done in 1979? Would you have called the BBC to complain? Or would you have trusted John Cleese's intent? And more importantly, in today's world, how do we tell the difference between satire that challenges us and content that's just hiding behind the word satire to say harmful things? Because that's the real question the Germans left us with. And we're still trying to answer it. What do you think?